And we're going to talk about the Constitution. If our words are a sword, then our knowledge is like the steel that we make it with. Hi, Sherry. Hi, Tracy. So let's get to a little bit of the fundamentals. Here's the problem, and I get this a lot when I'm talking to people, right? People say, well, Gavin, what are my rights? Hey, there's Kelly. Hi, Kelly. People say, what are my rights? Or what can I do in my state? Or this or that. And of course, we have the practical applications to grapple with because there's a lot of tyranny. And just because you have a right to do something, hey, Tammy, it's my sister there. Just because you have a right to do something does not mean you won't go to jail for it. And this gets back to the authority of government. So rather than just a regular Gavin Seim like talking and we're gonna carry on and talk about how bad the government is, which it is, we're gonna talk about the facts. We're gonna talk about what the founding fathers said, and we're gonna talk about what the Constitution says and what the law is. So first of all, what is the authority of government? Okay? Well, in this constitutional republic right here, there's three branches of government, arguably four. It's typically called three: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So the foundation is right there. Now, really, there's a fourth. The fourth branch is the people. That's you and me, and that's where authority comes from. Why? Because God gave it to us. We all have our rights. We have our natural rights. We have our life, our liberty, and our property, the foundation of law. Okay, so this is something we really need to establish before we address the constitutional implications. There's an idea that because a legislature that we elected, right, makes a law, that therefore it's a law if they make a statute. Now let's think about that. A legislature, the legislative branch, whether it's in your city council or the Congress, right? The Congress and the Senate, all these things, right? Elements of legislative branches. Now, there's a misnomer, a foundational misunderstanding we need to clear up. People assume that, well, if the people spoke, hi, Mom, if the people speak, and through their legislators they speak and a law is made, then you have to obey it. But that's not at all how law works, nor is it how the Founding Fathers intended the law to work. Let's go briefly to section 141 of John Locke's Second Treatise of Government. Now, I'm going to try and keep the long Old English reading to minimums here, but I want to give you guys a couple of contexts, because what we're talking about tonight is not Gavin's opinion. This is constitutional law, and it goes back to our civil rights. Now, section 141, John Locke says, and bear in mind, this is before the Constitution was written. This is before the United States of America. This is some of the founding principles that the Constitution was drafted and inspired on. Fourthly, the legislative cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands, for it being but a delegated power from the people. They who have it cannot pass it over to others. The people alone can appoint the form of commonwealth, which is by constituting the legislative and appointing in whose hands that shall be. Now, let's think about this. We could read on, but that kind of covers the essence of it, right? It covers this idea the legislative cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands, for it being from the people, they who have it cannot pass it over to others. So this is simple, right? We all understand this. If you work in a store and your job is to stock the shelves, that doesn't mean you have the authority to take cash out of the register, right? That authority has not been delegated to you. Let's say you do have the authority to take cash out of the register, right? Does that mean you have the authority to give someone else that authority? Absolutely not. And this goes back to John Locke's principle. Now, don't think this is dry, because if you put the pieces together on this, sometimes when we get into law and the Constitution, it's like, oh, this is kind of dull. And I know how it feels. You start reading the Old English and stuff. But we're going to simplify this today because it's very important that we know this. Okay, so the people, this is the important misconception that people have. They think, well, we the people can tell our government, we can elect a legislature that can make whatever laws they want, or that we want them to, and therefore they're laws. No, that's not the case, because we're actually delegating authority too, right? We're delegating authority to a legislative body, but we can only delegate that which we already possess. You and me and anybody else doesn't have the authority to steal from someone. We don't have the authority to take their life, liberty, and property, and therefore we cannot delegate it to others because we don't possess it in the first place. So let's make a simple concept, right? You do not have the authority as a member of your community to delegate to a city council the authority to make a law that people have to mow their lawns once a week. You may be tired of the fact that your neighbor never mows his lawn, but you have no authority to say, I'm going to use a delegated authority that will use force and fines to make my neighbor mow his lawn. Because you don't have the authority to, by force, make your neighbor mow his lawn. Therefore, you don't have the authority to delegate that authority. It's pretty simple. Okay, let's go and talk about that delegated authority now. And here's what's happening. We're going to talk about how this relates to the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, all these alphabet agencies, right? Let's talk about practical implications that we're seeing today. Okay? Article 1, Section 8, we hear that a lot, right? Ammon Bundy talked about it. 17 talks about the lands federal government can control. And there's all these things, right? Section 8 gives Congress, it's the fundamental foundation of these are the elements, the authorities that we're passing on, that we're allowing Congress to deal with. Everything else is reserved to the people and the states. That's in the 9th and 10th Amendments. Okay, so what can Congress do? Well, if you haven't read the Constitution, go read Article 1, Section 8. Because that's what Congress can do. That's what they can legislate and control and things like that. And that's all. That's all. Unless it's listed in an amendment or something like that. Okay, so there's what Congress can do. Now, here's an example. Most of the alphabet agencies, as we know, are completely unconstitutional, right? Let's talk about one that's technically not, although it's really not an alphabet agency, but that would be the Copyright Office. Okay? And here it is in Section 8, right along with the post offices. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights of their respective writings and discoveries. Okay? So our intellectual property is part of our property. This is affirmed in the Constitution, and it's saying we want this to be handled by the Congress so we have a national standard. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me because this is going to be, I think, informative when we put all the pieces together. The Constitution gives Congress to make, in essence, the Copyright Office. They give Congress, we gave Congress, the authority to say, all right, we're going to make a copyright system in these United States, a copyright and patent system, and so we're going to delegate these people to manage that, right? Now stop for a moment. The Congress has no authority to delegate to the people at the Copyright Office to make laws. And I'm not trying to argue here. I've had to deal with some copyright stuff. You know, I'm in media. And the copyright system is completely broken, the copyright and patent system. It's quite frankly ridiculous. But the agency, right, that is one of the few delegated authorities of the federal government. And so copyright is one of the few things they can do, and even though, just like everything that we seem to have these days, government screwing it up, the Copyright Office is not inherently unconstitutional. But that doesn't mean the Copyright Office can make laws. Only Congress can make laws. Now, if the Copyright Office said, well, we need a law to go along with this copyright, other than our basic directive, they could go back to Congress and approve that through Congress, but only the Congress has the power to make laws, and only they have the power to make laws within the confines that law can be, that is, within our constitutions, and within the authority that we had the ability to grant them in the first place, that is life, liberty, and property. Okay? Now let's go to the BLM or the Forest Service. My brother Nathan, and guys, if this stuff's useful, like it, get engaged, share it, comment, let's keep this going, right? Let's educate. One time my brother Nathan was camping up by Yellowstone, and he went in the forest. Hey guys, he went in the forest and he camped there with a friend. Now there was no restrictive signs. It was an open forest, and it's our land, right? It was a national forest. Of course, Article 1, Section 8 says the government can't have a national forest, the federal government, but let's address that in a moment. He was in a national forest, and some of you may have experienced this, and he camped in this spot where there was no restrictive signs, and they came and they wrote him a ticket for illegal camping in an open forest, okay? Now, their assertion, they said he violated a law. It would have been one of the CFRs, I believe they called them. And it's a double thing, right? First of all, what they cited him with was camping in a prohibited area and is so posted. That's how their own regulation is written. But here's the other part. This is not a law that ever passed Congress, okay? So number one, you have the law being broken in so many ways here. Number one, there's no such thing as a national forest. The Congress has no authority to make a national forest. Number two, even if the national forest were lawful, if the Forest Service was a lawful agency, like, let's say, the Copyright Office, for example, they still wouldn't have the authority to make a regulation, a law, a statute that was enforceable at the point of a gun. Now, these forest agents, you've seen me deal with these guys, they run around all suited up like there's some kind of army man ready to shoot you, right? Especially in some of the big populated areas. They consider themselves police. Well, we talked about this in the live stream with Ammon the other day when he talked about good cops and what a cop is. These aren't police. They're not a delegated authority. They're not an elected sheriff. There's no police officers, but they'll still shoot you if you resist. Okay, so Nathan gets this fine, and he's like, this is ridiculous. I didn't even break any law. And so he goes for a while, and he doesn't pay this fine. Pretty soon, there's a federal warrant out for him, and the marshal is calling him saying, hey, if you don't get this resolved, I'm going to have to come and get you. So here's what's happening. The Forest Service, who didn't have a right to exist in the first place, made a law that only Congress has a right to make laws, but because they say they're a delegated authority from Congress, they can now, therefore, empty the cash register, even though the people that gave Congress the ability to manage the cash register, or the Senate, didn't give them the authority to give that authority to anyone else. Okay? So an unconstitutional agency claiming that they're legislators is now making CFRs, lots of them, and they will write you a fine that is, or a punishment that is a violation, punishable by jail, by a fine, and if you resist, by death. Now, this is the facts, right? The truth is, you have the Forest Service, or the BLM, or whatever illegal agency, right, making law, and the ultimate penalty if you do not comply with their law is death, if you don't bow to them. Because if that marshal comes to get you for camping in the wrong place, and believe me, he will, and you try to protect yourself because he has no authority to come get you, he's violating his oath then to protect your life, liberty, and property. That marshal comes to get you and you try to defend yourself, you are the one who will be shot. Remember Ruby Ridge? Remember Waco? Remember Lavoy Finicum? Guys, this goes back a long ways, okay? So there's two examples. The BLM's the same way, right? BLM makes regulations and rules and they write fines. The Forest Service and the BLM are similar in a lot of ways. They're these land management agencies that control our lands at the point of a gun. Now let's go back. Let's go to the Federalist Papers. This was the discussions as they were debating the Constitution. So Federalist 78, I believe this was 1778. Okay, and I'm just going to read you a small cite from the Federalist Papers. And he's talking about, in particular in this one, the judiciary. And this is going to come to a very important point. Some perplexity regarding the rights of the courts to pronounce legislative acts void, because contrary to the Constitution, has arisen from an imagination that the doctrine would apply a superiority of the judiciary to the legislative power. It is urged that the authority which can declare the acts of another void must necessarily be superior to one whose acts may be declared void. As this doctrine is of great importance in all the American constitutions, a brief discussion of the grounds on which it rests cannot be unacceptable. There is no position which depends on clearer principles than that the act of a delegated authority contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal and the servant is above his master, and that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. Now think about that and go read Federalist 78. if you want to really analyze that. He's saying a lot here. He's saying the courts are a subordinate. They're not supposed to be superior. They're only supposed to be a check and balance in our system to be a check for lawless laws, right? Now we have the courts interpreting. We have the courts essentially making legislation themselves. We have the Supreme Court that has become one of the most lawless and yet the most powerful agencies in the nation, a peerage, if you will. But he's covering 2 points here. He's saying not only is the Supreme Court not, or the courts, not superior to the legislative, but also the legislative is not superior to the people. They cannot act outside the authority they were given by the people. And of course, the people cannot give an authority they don't have. Does this sound familiar to John Locke, to the words we started with? Are you seeing all this come together? See, they're making laws that cannot be law. They're creating agencies they're not allowed to create, and then giving those agencies the power to make law. The EPA, the BLM, the EDU, the Forest Service. These are fake laws. And what did our founding fathers say about this? And bear in mind, that was Alexander Hamilton, I believe. He's considered one of the most big government of founding fathers, right? And listen to the words he's saying. This is how far we've fallen. This is how far we've come from what it is to understand the separation of powers, but also the authority of the legislative, either at the federal or the state or the community level. Legislative authority cannot exceed the authority of an individual. It can only act to protect. So people will say, well, I'm against all government because government is force and it's lawless. The problem is we have lawless government because we are not maintaining it. We're not resisting, right? People say, well, Gavin, you shouldn't be challenging the police. You should be writing your congressman. Absolutely not. You have to challenge the soldier on the street who's violating you. You have to put people back in their place by working from the bottom up. You have to get officers and sheriffs again who will say, we will not enforce lawless laws. See, if you had a lawful sheriff, if you had an oath-keeping sheriff in your county, he would say, I will not enforce a law that violates someone's rights. I will not enforce a law or an agency created by the federal government when they don't have that authority. Furthermore, I will defend against it and I will prevent them. If you had a lawful sheriff, he would be arresting Forest Service police because they're fake police. They're impersonating an authority. They don't have the authority. Is this making sense? Am I coming across here? Shout me out in the comments. I'm trying not to get like super nerdy legal talk. I want this to be simple for us. Okay? So, where does this put us? They're violating this. Where does it put us? Well, let's go back to John Locke. In all states and conditions, the true remedy of force without authority is to oppose force to it. The use of force without authority always puts him that uses it in a state of war as the aggressor and renders him liable to be treated accordingly. Okay, now think about that. All the courts, all the Congress, right? All their powers, who are they enforced by? The police of various agencies. Without the police, they would have no power. We would laugh at them. But police come in with a gun to our head and they say, we're going to enforce this because it's our job. It's the law. All right? But what does our founder say? What does John Locke say? To use force without authority always puts him that uses it into a state of war and renders him to be treated accordingly. The officer can be lawfully resisted. And people say, well, you shouldn't attack police officers. They put their life on the line. Guys, the burglar puts his life on the line. Putting your life on the line is not the measure of a lawful man, of a principled man, or of a good officer of liberty. Think about where we stand. Now, I want us to be peaceful and principled, but people attack me because I simply get toe-to-toe and I question and I challenge and I say, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're not honoring your oath. You should all be doing that. People say, well, they're a good cop. You shouldn't question them. This goes back to the live stream Kelly did that we shared earlier. Of course you should question them. The bad cops should be immediately removed and prosecuted. The people that are good people, let's say, that are just cops that are out following orders, well, they're still bad cops, even if they're nice enough guys whose goal is not to abuse people. They're still enforcing lawlessness, and they render themselves to be treated accordingly. I shared a video on this page earlier, and it was this off-duty cop out of his jurisdiction in plain clothes trying to drag away a 14-year-old kid. And the community in the neighborhood, they threw the cop over a hedge. And so then the cop gets his gun out and he errantly fires the gun and everybody scatters, right? But he's a cop, right? He has that authority. Of course he doesn't have that authority. His authority is no more than we can delegate to him. Can you imagine what would happen if you or I did the same thing as that off-duty cop? We'd be charged with multiple felonies. We have a man in Oregon, he just got convicted on 21 felonies for simply drawing his gun during a protest because he felt afraid. And he was convicted, guys. They convicted him of 21 felonies. Federal, I believe this was federal. Those may have been state. We'll have to double check that. But it doesn't matter because guess what? What else does the Constitution of the federal and the state say? It says our right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And so they charge us with 20 crimes related to a gun law where no one was even harmed. There's not even a victim. And they say, well, you violated this gun law. Federal arms laws is one of the #1 ways the feds put people away, guys. People are serving life in prison for simply possessing bullets that they weren't allowed to have. Oh, well, we've labeled you a felon, now you don't have your rights. Really? Because the Constitution doesn't give you a right to revoke someone's rights. It doesn't exist. So you see how far we've come? So what is our right to resist these officers when they come to enforce these lawless laws? Unlimited. They're no different than any other thug. That's why all the police have become bad cops. Some of them are decent enough people, maybe at their root, but they're becoming bad people because they choose to be bad. The people that say, Gavin, most of the cops are good, they can never give me an example. I still have a standing $500 reward for somebody that can find me an oath-keeping cop. To keep your oath at this point, you have to stop being a cop, and you have to join us serfs out here in resisting and opposing what the blue line of treason has become, right? We have to stand up. How many more have to die? How many Lavoy Finnecums, Dylan Taylors, Alton Sterlings? How many more executions by officers? And so we say, well, the officer has a right to defend himself if somebody's resisting. Well, yes, if their arrest was not a violation in the first place. If an officer stops you and says, oh, I'm going to arrest you because you're not stopping at my checkpoint, or I'm going to arrest you because you possess a gun and you're not allowed. That officer places himself into a state of war. He relinquishes his authority, and he may be opposed as any other man. He may be lawfully resisted. I'm not saying you should resist, because at this point, bear in mind, we're dealing with people that will kill you or beat you to death on the side of the road in many cases. Do all cops have that murderous heart? No. But they're still out there violating people at the point of a gun for things they don't have authority over, and then if the person resists, we say, oh, they resisted an officer, they deserve to be in jail. Well, wait a minute. Most of the arrests officers are making in America today, the person has a lawful right to resist because the officer is violating their rights. Let's talk about the BLM before we close here. And I believe Ammon Bundy may have made this point. The BLM doesn't answer to anyone now but the judicial. The judicial is not supposed to be the highest authority, right? They're supposed to affirm and uphold our rights by declaring void unlawful acts, unlawful trials, unlawful convictions. The BLM is an agency, right? Bureau of Land Management, created by Congress, okay? Let's say we have this agency created by Congress, and they say, we're going to create an agency to manage federal lands. Well, number one, they can't own those federal lands. They're not really federal lands. They're stolen lands. Number two, because of that, they have no authority to make an agency to manage those lands. So Congress is breaking the law at this point. All your congressmen that support this, okay? Next, you have the BLM. The BLM goes out and they say, now we're a created agency, now we're going to make laws. Well, they don't have any authority. Even if they had been a constitutional agency, which they are not, they certainly don't have the authority to make laws because Congress doesn't have the authority to delegate the authority to make laws. So who really then? Now you have these big agencies, they don't even answer to Congress. They just make up their own rules. Theoretically, could Congress dissolve them if they were doing their job? Yeah, but we're not even close. Guys, we don't even have congressmen that have the balls to speak out and say all the people being abused in the prison system and the Bundys are being railroaded. We don't even have a prosecuting attorney or an attorney general that says drop all these charges against all these political prisoners. To support his good old boys and his buddies in the blue line and in the corrupt government, he's going to continue that prosecution. When his duty, Jeff Sessions' duty, is to immediately drop the charges because they're charges that are based on lawless authority. But see, he's engaged in treason, just like all the prosecutors, just like the officers guarding the cells. They're a part of treason because they've declared war. They've placed themselves in a state of war against the people and their rights, which by the Constitution constitutes treason. So now the BLM is this out-of-control agency, right? But who do they answer to? Well, really the only people they have to be in bed with is the courts. Because as long as the courts don't overturn their lawless actions, they can get away with murder. And that's exactly what they do. So you have all these insane agencies now that have been lawlessly created by a lawless Congress who are now making lawless legislation, but the courts say, because they are completely usurped by lawless tyrants, the courts say, well, we find this to be constitutional because of X, Y, and Z, even though they don't have that authority. They only have the authority to affirm that it's unconstitutional, because no legislative act, contrary to the authority that grants it, can be valid. All their laws are fake law, guys, that are outside the authority they've been delegated. Just like any law is fake law that's outside the authority of protecting life, liberty, and property equally and for all. That's why you can't delegate someone the authority in government to say there has to be a law that my neighbor has to mow his lawn. You don't have that authority. So we have lawlessness, and the problem is the lawlessness goes all the way down to the people because we don't love our neighbor, because we're ignorant, because we don't love God, because the church won't stand up and speak out against corruption and persecution of good people. Oh, we say we don't get into politics. And so here we are. The people actually want laws. And I've heard this many times, right? I've heard people saying, well, I want a law against that guy. I want a law against this. That should be illegal. How many times have you heard that? That should be illegal. Really? Where's the victim? See, the problem is we're so ignorant, and that's why we're trying to resolve this tonight. Most people won't share this. They won't listen to it. They won't study it on their own. You don't need to listen to me. You just need to get in the documents yourself. Because most people don't want to know the Constitution. They don't want to know their rights, and they don't want to protect them for their children. They don't want there to be freedom. They want them to be left alone and have money in their pocket and a nice car in their driveway, and they want their neighbor that annoys them to be in jail. That, unfortunately, is the heart of most of America, because we failed to love our neighbor. Okay, so to recap as we close, legislative, executive, and judicial, right? Executive, limited authorities in the Constitution, okay? And we're seeing those being violated on a regular basis from the executive branch, from the president. Legislative, violated. Almost every law, almost every federal law is completely illegal, guys. Here's the manual for the federal government. These are the only things. Only the stuff in here can they make laws on. So we have literally, mountains and mountains increasing every year of federal law that can put you away for the rest of your life, take your property, destroy your family, or kill you. And the law literally has no authority in law. Why do they get away with it? Okay? Well, because first of all, your officers, your sheriffs, none of them will honor their oath. We don't have one constitutional sheriff in the entire nation. And believe me, if you had a constitutional sheriff tomorrow, the world would hear about it because feds would be arrested. People would be set free from prisons that have been charged and convicted of false crimes. It would turn the world completely upside down. The sheriffs either don't care or have no concept of what we're talking about tonight. And these are some of the most powerful people in our communities because their job is to use force in a lawful way to stop people who are using force to violate us, be they the burglar, the rapist, or the government, which is very little different from the rapist. But instead, the officers are violating us to support the same system, which is then affirmed by a lawless judicial that will say, I find probable cause when there is none in the law, that will say, we find this conviction lawful, we find this sentence lawful. And so none of them, they're all compromised, they're all engaged in treason, right down to your local sheriff. I think some of them don't even know it. But if they're that ignorant of what they're supposed to protect, they should not be in power. And I think most of them come into power and they soon realize what's really going on, but they want the power, so they continue to violate. Okay? So that covers the real power of government. The real power of government, and we'll take some questions here as I wrap up. I need to get home. The real power of government is to protect life, liberty, and property equally and for all, because that's the only thing that could be law, because all you have is your life, liberty, and property that is inherent and natural in every person, and therefore that is the only thing that you can delegate to another, and that's it. It really is that simple, guys. Law's not complicated. We've got to get back to the basics. We're going to talk about this more as I'm going forward on my book, and we're going to actually make the case, as I do in some of my classes, where we're going to establish why law is what it is. What is law itself? Where does life, liberty, and property come from? And we're going to validate that on its own, without having to say, oh, I'm quoting this guy or quoting that guy. We're going to validate that on the facts. But you've seen what the Founding Fathers said. You've seen what our Constitution says. And you see what our prattling reporters and prattling treasonous congressmen and officers are saying. So stop pretending you have good congressmen when they won't even speak out to honor their oath. Stop pretending your sheriffs are good because they smile and wave and help you change your tire. Maybe they're nice enough guys at the barbecue, but they're still too cowardly to honor their oath because they'd rather have a paycheck than do their job. Stop pretending that those who violate the liberties of good men, who destroy the laws of a nation, are righteous, honorable, and just men because they plaster a smile or a platitude on their mouth. How do we restore this? People say, well, okay, we recognize that this is bad. What do we do? You have to stand up. You guys need to realize that I don't go take on police officers and challenge them and get toe to toe with them and do that. I don't do it because it's fun. It's very disturbing. It's very, very risky sometimes. In certain instances, it doesn't always have to be. And it's very important. Don't ever let someone tell you that your stand needs to be a standing down. It matters how you stand. And standing down is not standing. When push comes to shove, the officers of this nation are in every case the ones violating our rights and enforcing the lawless laws. They should be ashamed. They should be called out in public. They should be called out by their family members. They should stop. They are criminals. The blue line is treason. And I've proven it over and over and over again. And writing letters isn't going to fix it. We didn't have 1776. We didn't get to this Constitution because the Founding Fathers said, well, let's keep writing letters to the lords, right? Let's keep writing letters to the king. No. They said no more. They started standing up on the street. They started resisting. They said enough's enough. We're sick of being violated by these officers. Everybody always wants to pretend, oh, let's hero worship the police. Let's make them the idols. They're our friends, right? The feds are our friends. They're nice enough guys. Folks, I got news for you. Who the Founding Fathers resisted with all force was the officers. Now, I want us to go out and be peaceful. I want us to be principled. And I want us to avoid force whenever possible. Doesn't mean we don't have a right to it, but we want to avoid that. We're trying to avoid another revolution. But we need a revolution of hearts, which brings a revolution of words, which brings a revolution of action. This country could be changed if you started standing up to the police on the street. If hundreds of thousands of people started opposing what officers are doing on the street, this country could be changed. But you have to have the knowledge of what law is. You have to have the knowledge of what we talked about tonight. Great respect for just authority requires a matched disrespect for unjust authority. Somebody mentioned this in here, honorable. These judges aren't honorable, right? They said they're not honorable. Stop honoring the dishonorable. When we justify the wicked and condemn the just, it's an abomination, is what Proverbs says. But whether you're a believer or not, we've laid out the law simple, to the point. You can either choose to stand with the law by opposing the lawless officers, the lawless judges, and the lawless executives and and legislatives. And if you don't do that, you don't stand with the Constitution. If you don't oppose our blue line, you're not standing with the Constitution. You're a loyalist. You're standing with the treason. It's really as simple as that. You have to choose. Are you okay with treason and a usurped government and murder and abuse and lawless laws? Are you okay with a government that exists in anarchy, doing whatever it wants to whomever it wants? I know you won't be okay with it when they come for you. So maybe you should stop being okay with it now. Maybe we should stop pretending that it's bad to call out corrupt men, corrupt government, corrupt officers, loyalists who are provocateurs among us. Maybe it's time to stop hiding and stop being afraid to speak out and to defend your neighbor, to defend the person being abused. Because you should be defending those who are next to you being abused. That's the best defense, is one that comes from other honorable men. Because otherwise they'll come for you. They'll attack you. They'll slander you, like we see with so many of the provocateurs and informants and feds that are running their Facebook accounts and that are showing up at these trials and things, trying to disrupt and get us off message. The message is liberty and justice for all. It's affirmed but not granted by our constitutions. And we demand it in our law that our officers enforce it. And when they do not only not enforce it, but they violate it, they are traitors. They do not deserve respect or honor. They are tyrants. And they deserve, in every principled way, in every way necessary, the tyrant requires your opposition. Because otherwise, the tyranny will never end. You guys have a good night. I know what side I stand on. I know I'm not a loyalist. I'm loyal to God, the author of liberty. And I'll defend it for everyone, even the people that don't believe in my God. Let's say a prayer. Hey God, it's us again. There's a real small few of us that are wanting to wake up, but I hope that there's a few more, because we need you to open people's hearts and minds. There's so much blindness. We're so blinded by things and by lusts and by propaganda and by what's easy for us. Perhaps worst of all in the professing churches of this nation that have turned their back on your word and on your liberty. Father, there's a few of us, but please honor our effort despite its weakness, and give us strength. Give us the words, and show your glory by tearing down the walls and finding us a refuge in liberty and setting the prisoners free, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, you guys, keep the prayers going, but remember, our faith is not just a word. Our faith requires action. And even if you don't share my faith, we can all agree on this, that when we love our neighbor as ourselves, we defend law and we bring liberty to everyone. You guys have a good night.